Today we're going to have a brief introduction to William Shakespeare's Hamlet. So Hamlet is a play that has fascinated audiences and readers and viewers since it was first written around 1601 to 1604. The play centers around Hamlet's decision whether or not to avenge the murder of his father, who was the King of Denmark. Now, the weight of this decision drives all of the other action and the relationships throughout the play. Now, Hamlet is part of an old tradition of revenge plays and is based on an old oral legend about Hamlet, a prince whose father was killed by his uncle, who then married his mother. Now, in this story, Hamlet pretends to be mad, he pretends to be crazy, while plotting how to avenge his father's death. So then, who and what is Hamlet? Well, critics have read this character as a tragic figure, and his major flaw is an unwillingness to act. Sometimes they look at him as a representative of the human psyche, most famously Freud and Jung, as he tries to pretend to be crazy. And sometimes people will look at him as a modern individual fighting against the old ways of seeing and being in the world. So when we look at it as literature, basically we take Shakespeare's basic plot line, which essentially has 5 stories in one. First, it's a family drama. An uncle has married the wife of his brother. There's also a love story. Young love is forced apart by circumstance. Of course, we've also got the sense of madness or going crazy. A young prince may or may not have gone crazy. The revenge play. We have death, we've got murders, we've got suicide, we even have ghosts coming to speak to us. And of course, because this deals with the King of Denmark, this is a political thriller. Who should be on the throne? So when we take a look at Hamlet as basically being a political survivor, we have all of these ideas coming in, all of these different political alliances and the backstabbing that has been going on behind his back, the plotting and the scheming that we have, the illicit hookups, whether or not he is crazy or mad or whether or not he's completely sane. We have all of these ideals that are a very political thriller in this particular story. But then people will also look at Hamlet as the first quote-unquote modern man. Hamlet can be a play that is concerned with the question of who am I? Matter of fact, the first line of the play is, who's there? Now, is our role in life defined by fate? Is it defined by our family members? Or can we define ourselves by our own choices? And then, are we completely alone in the world, or are we irrevocably tied to others? And that is known as humanism. Do we tie ourselves to other people? Now, Hamlet's struggle with these existential questions has led critics such as Harold Bloom and Freud to suggest that Hamlet is actually a representation of a fully modern man. He's able to look at the stupidity, the falsity, the difficulty and sham of everyday life without relying on the easy answers that were taught him. So what are going to be some of the key themes you should look for in Hamlet? Well, the idea of revenge versus justice. What is the difference? And is there one that's more moral or more civil than the other? And does the act of revenge irrevocably change an individual? Somebody who's trying to get revenge, how are they going to be weighed upon psychologically? The idea of action versus inaction. Is doing something, is action always virtuous? Or is it possible to take action in a world where nothing is ever certain? You can also look at the theme of fate versus autonomy. Do we have control over the shape of our own lives, or is it fate that guides us? And then lastly, appearance versus reality. Is deceit a fundamental part of the way that society functions? When we have the ideals of appearance, especially in today's world, is what you see reality? Or is life a series of parts that we act in order to get by? We also have the thematic question of madness or going crazy. Is insanity just a sane way of reacting to the madness of the world around us? Who is insane in Hamlet? Is Hamlet insane, or is the world around him just insanity? And then, of course, we have loyalty and betrayal. What constitutes loyalty? After all, once his father is dead, Hamlet should give loyalty to the new king, his uncle. But to whom do we owe loyalty? Do we owe the loyalty to a state? Do you owe the loyalty to our family? Do we owe it to our lovers? Do we owe it to ourselves? And then if we have loyalties that are conflicting, our family says one thing but the state says another, is it betrayal? What happens when loyalties conflict? And Hamlet is a very popular play. Matter of fact, we see it often in pop culture. Not only do you see Hamlet being put in modern day clothing or in modern day places, you see it in traditional kind of wear, you see it in Shakespearean wear, but you also see Hamlet in different pop culture settings as well. So when we look at the structural devices in Hamlet, even though it's very different when it comes into pop culture stance, you're still going to see the very critical Freytag's pyramid. You're still going to see the 5 different areas for your plot line, where you start off with an inciting moment, an exposition, your rising action that leads to the complication. You go all the way up to the climax and then the falling action, and then finally your last moment of suspense right before your catastrophe. So we do have a very traditional plot line in spite of the very modern man, in spite of the very modern ideas. You still have a traditional structural device. Shakespeare put it there so the play would move the way it's supposed to. And lastly, you're probably going to be looking at those dramatic devices in Hamlet. For example, the crisis at the beginning of Freytag's pyramid. The moment or event in the plot where the conflict is most directly addressed, when the main character wins or loses and the secret is revealed. Now, usually you would find this in Act 3 of Shakespeare. And the ending of the story is going to start becoming inevitable. So when you're getting around the middle of the play, right before you get to the climactic point, usually found around Act 3, you are going to get into your crisis. And then afterwards, you're going to see the climax, which then leads to the catastrophe in a tragedy. The high point of tension and conflict. It marks a major turning point in one or more of the characters. Once the climax happens, the main character or characters cannot go back. This conflict has now been resolved, and it's moving towards its catastrophe, which is usually found in Act 5, the last act. Well, that was your introduction to Hamlet. Thank you so much for stopping by the channel. If you liked what you saw, please give a like and consider subscribing to the channel. If you'd like me to continue on with Hamlet or move to more Shakespearean plays, please let me know down in the comments. Thanks for stopping by.